Netflix has given us some pretty great movies and series over the last few years. Some have tackled simple subjects and ideas, some have pulled at our nostalgia strings, and some yet have tried to shine a light on more serious, heavy topics. These have worked to varying degrees, but some, unfortunately, have failed in one way or another. While they tried to give us a realistic, eye-opening view of the dark, dirty parts of our society, the result is anywhere from laughable to actually maybe making the situation even worse. The latest example of this is the Netflix original movie, To the Bone. To the Bone stars Ellen, a 20-year-old college dropout who, until recently, had her own following on Tumblr. She suffers from anorexia, and it's to the point where her family is actually trying to step in and take measures to fix her, as the case may be. This family, however, is actually, as we come to find out, the main cause of her problems. Her parents are divorced, her real mother apparently never really showed her much affection, and now her dad is too busy to care. She's left with her stepmom, and they get along about as well as you would imagine a stepdaughter-stepmother would, which is to say, not very well. Add on to this the fact that Ellen suffers from extreme anorexia, and I guess you could say her life isn't really going so great. So this is the whole backdrop of the show. Now, the first problem with To the Bone comes at the very beginning. The very first line is Ellen and one of her Rexy friends, as they're called, talking about how magazines brainwash girls into having body dysmorphic issues by giving them unrealistic expectations.
It's like every time you turn on the TV or look at a magazine, it's, oh my God, this cake is so delicious, and like your reward or something. And then you turn the page and there's some sad, fat before girl, and she's all, I hate myself. And then the thin after girl goes, I did this diet, now I'm happy and everyone loves me.
However, the entire rest of the movie never touches on this point once. Ellen's body issues, we come to learn, can basically be boiled down to the fact that she feels she has no control over her life. Her family's in pieces, she dropped out of school, her life just feels like a whirlwind, and the only feeling of control she has is in making herself not eat. She starves herself to feed her emotional void, I guess you could say. The problem, though, is that this point about beauty standards is kind of thrown out there like a wink wink nudge nudge kind of thing, but nothing ever really comes of it. Later in the movie, when Ellen moves into a home for kids with eating disorders, none of the other girls ever mention anything about beauty standards or magazines or anything. It's just kind of tossed out there at the beginning, and it's never followed up on. Now, speaking of the other girls, this is another point where the movie falls short. Eventually, Ellen meets Dr. William Beckham, played by Keanu Reeves of all people. Dr. Beckham is supposed to be a charismatic, wise father figure for Ellen, but Keanu Reeves phones in his performance so hard he might as well just be using a telegraph. His acting is so flat that any emotional connection we're supposed to feel is about as thin as some old saran wrap. The movie even goes out of its way to tell us that he's supposed to be some hot young doctor guy with scenes like this.
Damn, Dr. Beck, you trying to turn me straight?
That's a different program.
I mean, it's Keanu Reeves, who's like in his 50s now. This really doesn't work like they meant it to. Anyway, Ellen moves into his house for troubled young people in an inpatient program, where she meets several other girls and one guy who suffer from varying body dysmorphic issues. But here, in my opinion, is the biggest missed opportunity of the whole movie. None of the other girls' backstories or life details of any kind are discussed. The entire movie is shown only from Ellen's perspective. Now, of course, Ellen is the main character, so yes, the movie's about her. But this movie was kind of advertised and portrayed to be about anorexia, and how this movie was going to give us a realistic look at the real issues surrounding it. But our view and understanding of it is only shown from one rather extreme point of view. We never get to learn anything about the other girls and why they suffer from their own issues. The movie isn't about body dysmorphia issues, it's about one girl who just so happens to have body dysmorphia issues. This may seem like only a small difference, but it's crucial in how the movie plots along. To this point, later in the movie we learn that Ellen quit her Tumblr blog because one young girl who was apparently a big fan of her artwork, and oddly enough her anorexia, starved herself and ended up taking her own life, going so far as to even leave a note for Ellen herself. Now this, at least to me, is the real story here. The real look at how body dysmorphia can not only be dangerous to you, but how it can inadvertently affect people around you, even those you may have never met. But the movie only mentions this plot point maybe like twice. And while we're led to believe it affected Ellen deeply on some level, we never really get to explore it. Again, the movie was advertised as giving us a real unfiltered look at the kind of issues that young girls go through. But when we finally get to the heart of the issue, the movie completely shies away from it, and we're just left wondering what it was all about in the first place. Now, the movie goes on, and there's a kind of almost dark and twisted love story between Ellen and the only other guy in the house, Luke. Luke, as it turns out, is also the only other character that we get any kind of backstory for, but even then, we never really understand what drove him to his body issues. He just has them because that's the point of the movie, I guess. At the end, Ellen and Luke have a falling out and she leaves the house. She visits her mother, who since the divorce has apparently just gone full San Francisco hipster, and they share an intimate and rather bizarre experience, which somehow leads Ellen to her aha moment, where she finally has a change of heart and decides that her life is worth living. She goes back to the house, and we're left with a typical happily ever after style ending. The problem, though, is that this is not at all how body dysmorphia works. Now, to be honest, I have never had anorexia. I was, however, pretty fat for my entire childhood, up to about 17 or so. All my formative years were spent with classmates and family members who, for some reason, felt the need to constantly remind me about how I looked. Ultimately, I lost all the weight, started working out, things are much better. But even now, at 29 years old, it still haunts me to some degree. I still see myself as a fat kid. I still count calories on everything, and I check for any potential love handles I may have developed several times a day. And the thought that I might bounce back at any moment is something I worry about constantly. Body dysmorphia is not really something you just get over one day. You can certainly get better, and you can fix it to varying degrees, for lack of a better word, but this is something you're going to carry with you for the rest of your life. It's kind of like breaking your wrist, for example. Even after it heals and everything's all better, there's always this little click sound every time you move it that reminds you that you used to have a broken wrist. This is, in a very oversimplified way, what it's like. Ellen suddenly gets inspired to get better, and that's that. But as I said, this is not a realistic portrayal of what body dysmorphia is like. Even with my comparatively very benign experience, it's much more involved and not something you just get over one day because Keanu Reeves mumbled something at you. I have to give Netflix a lot of credit for trying. They're trying to start a conversation about heavier topics, and I commend that. But as we've seen several times now, for whatever reason, they just can't seem to get it quite right.